Colonial America. Analyze the impact of the British mercantile system on colonial America, particularly focusing on economic and political changes in the 17th century.
If you ever wondered why colonial America had a love-hate relationship with Britain, it's all about the money. Let's break it down. In the 17th century, Britain had a grand plan to grow its wealth by controlling colonial trade. This system, called mercantilism, meant that colonies could only trade with Britain and had to use British ships. Sounds controlling, right? Well, it was. While this meant economic growth and bustling trade ports in the colonies, it also led to economic dependence on Britain. Colonists were making money, but they were also feeling the pinch of trade restrictions. Imagine working hard but not being able to sell your goods to the highest bidder. These trade restrictions didn't just affect wallets, they stirred up political tension too. Colonists began to resent the lack of control over their own trade and governance, planting the seeds of resistance. So, next time you think about economic policies, remember, the British mercantile system didn't just shape colonial America, it set the stage for a revolution.
Question number 2. The American Revolution. Evaluate the role of the Enlightenment in shaping American colonial resistance to British rule in the years leading up to the American Revolution.
If you think the American Revolution was just about tea parties and taxes, think again. Let's dive into the real spark, the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a supercharged era of new ideas. Thinkers like John Locke and Montesquieu were the rock stars of their time, spreading concepts like natural rights and the separation of powers. Imagine living in colonial America, hearing that everyone has natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and realizing British rule was trampling on these rights. Locke's idea that government should have the consent of the governed? That was revolutionary. Colonists started thinking, hey, we didn't sign up for this. Montesquieu's push for separating powers made them question British control even more. These thoughts fueled the flames of resistance, leading to protests and, eventually, the quest for independence. So, the next time you think about the American Revolution, remember, it was ideas from the Enlightenment that lit the fuse. Stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.
Question number 3. Constitutional Convention, 1787. Assess the key compromises made during the Constitutional Convention of 1787. How did these compromises reflect the political climate of the time?
I don't think people understand how a few key compromises in 1787 shaped America today. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was a hotbed of intense debate. At its core were two major compromises that stitched together a nation. First, the Great Compromise. This created a bicameral legislature with a House of Representatives based on population and a Senate with equal representation from each state. This balanced the interests of both large and small states, ensuring fair representation. Next, the Three-Fifths Compromise. This controversial agreement counted each enslaved person as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation. It was a stark reflection of the political climate and the contentious issue of slavery. These compromises were vital. They balanced federal authority with state sovereignty and united a diverse array of state interests. Without them, the Constitution as we know it might never have been created. The Constitutional Convention's key compromises didn't just shape the government, they laid the foundation for the United States we live in today.
Question number 4. The War of 1812. Analyze the causes and consequences of the War of 1812. How did it affect U.S. foreign policy and national identity?
Why did a young America go head-to-head with the world's biggest superpower in 1812? The War of 1812 started because the British were impressing American sailors, basically kidnapping them and restricting U.S. trade. They were also backing Native American attacks on U.S. frontier settlements. Talk about stirring the pot. Despite the chaos, the war had some big consequences. First, it solidified U.S. sovereignty, proving that America wasn't going to be pushed around. Second, it sparked a wave of national pride and unity, leading to the era of good feelings. Plus, it helped shape U.S. foreign policy by making it clear that America could stand its ground. So, the next time you think history is just a bunch of boring old facts, remember how the War of 1812 turned a fledgling nation into a proud, united, and sovereign America. Got any questions? Drop them in the comments.
Question number 5. The Jacksonian Era. Evaluate the impact of Andrew Jackson's presidency on the American political system. Consider both his political actions and his broader political philosophy.
This is why you need to know Andrew Jackson, the man who forever changed American politics. Andrew Jackson, the 7th US president, was all about the common man. Before Jackson, politics were dominated by elites. But Jackson busted that wide open. He expanded democratic participation, making politics more accessible to everyday people. But Jackson's legacy is a mixed bag. His Indian Removal Act forced Native Americans off their ancestral lands, leading to the tragic Trail of Tears. And his battle with the Second Bank of the United States? It showed his distrust of big institutions, pushing for a smaller government. Jackson's presidency was a roller coaster of progress and controversy. Love him or hate him, there's no denying he left an indelible mark on American politics. So next time you think about democracy, remember Andrew Jackson, the people's president.
Question number 6. Slavery and abolitionism. Discuss the key factors that led to the rise of the abolitionist movement in the 19th century.
Why did the fight against slavery explode in the 19th century? Let's break it down. In the 19th century, the abolitionist movement surged, driven by a mix of moral, religious and political forces. The Second Great Awakening, a fervent religious revival, ignited a passion for social reform, declaring slavery a sin against humanity. Visionaries like Frederick Douglass, a former slave, and Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, brought the brutal realities of slavery to the forefront, stirring the conscience of the nation. Meanwhile, industrialization was reshaping the North. Factories and railroads were booming, making slave labor less necessary and less profitable. As the economic landscape shifted, so did public opinion, leading to growing calls for abolition. So, why did the abolitionist movement gain momentum? It was the perfect storm of moral outrage, religious fervor and economic change, all converging to challenge the very foundations of slavery. And that's how history was made.
Question number 7. The Civil War. Evaluate the role of the Emancipation Proclamation in shaping the course of the Civil War and the future of slavery in the United States.
What if I told you one piece of paper could turn a war into a fight for freedom? Let's dive into the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, was more than just ink on paper. It declared that all enslaved people in Confederate states shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. But here's the twist. This document didn't free all enslaved people immediately with Dozier. Instead, it shifted the Civil War's focus to ending slavery. This transformed the conflict from a battle to preserve the Union into a moral crusade for freedom. The proclamation also allowed African Americans to enlist in the Union Army, adding nearly 200,000 soldiers to the fight against the Confederacy. And by undermining the Southern economy, which relied heavily on slave labor, it struck a critical blow to the Confederate war effort. So, while it wasn't the end of slavery overnight, the Emancipation Proclamation was a turning point that reshaped the future of the United States. A single document that turned the tide of history.
Question number 8. Reconstruction. Analyze the successes and failures of Reconstruction in addressing the social, political, and economic challenges faced by the South after the Civil War.
I think I messed up. Or did Reconstruction mess up the South? The Civil War had ended. But the real battle was just beginning. Reconstruction aimed to rebuild the South and bring equality. So what were its triumphs and setbacks? On the bright side, we got the 13th, 14th and 15th Amendments. Slavery abolished, citizenship granted, and voting rights extended to African Americans. Sounds like a win, right? But here's the kicker. The South wasn't ready to embrace these changes. Jim Crow laws popped up, enforcing racial segregation and disenfranchisement. The promise of equality, it kind of fell apart. Reconstruction showed us that legal reforms are powerful, but without social acceptance, they can fail. The struggle for true equality continued long after. So was Reconstruction a success or a failure? The answer's complicated, but one thing's clear, it was a crucial step in the ongoing fight for civil rights. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more quick history lessons.
Question number 9. The Gilded Age. How did industrialization during the Gilded Age contribute to the development of labor movements and the regulation of big business?
You need to hear this if you're a history buff or a student cramming for exams. We're diving into the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age was a time of booming industry and big dreams. But it wasn't all glitter and gold. Rapid industrialization brought harsh working conditions, long hours, and meager wages. Fed up with their plight, workers formed labor unions like the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor. These unions fought hard for better conditions, fair wages, and reasonable work hours. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. The government stepped in with regulations like the Sherman Antitrust Act to tackle monopolistic giants and protect workers' rights. So the next time you enjoy a weekend off, remember, it all started with the labor movements of the Gilded Age.
Question number 10. The Progressive Era. Analyze the key reforms of the Progressive Era and their impact on American society.
This is going to blow your mind. How did America become a place where everyone gets a fair shot? Let's dig in. The Progressive Era was like hitting the reset button on America. Key reforms aimed to regulate big business, clean up politics, and improve working conditions. Think women's suffrage, child labor laws, and antitrust legislation. Women fought tirelessly for the right to vote, finally winning in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. Child labor laws ensured kids traded factory floors for classrooms. And antitrust laws broke up monopolies, making the market more competitive. These changes weren't just policies, they were lifelines, pulling America out of the Gilded Age and into a more just society. So next time you're enjoying fair labor practices or casting your vote, give a nod to the Progressive Era. It's history that shaped our present and continues to influence our future.
Question number 11. The Spanish-American War. Discuss the causes and outcomes of the Spanish-American War. How did it change U.S. foreign policy?
This is gonna blow your mind. The Spanish-American War was a turning point in U.S. history. So what kicked off the Spanish-American War? First, there was the U.S. support for Cuban independence from Spain. Then, the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor lit the fuse. Boom! The U.S. declared war on Spain in 1898. The outcome? A quick victory for the U.S. Spain surrendered and America walked away with new territories: Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. This wasn't just about land. This marked the US as a global imperial power. Here's the kicker. It changed US foreign policy forever. America went from isolation to intervention, stepping onto the world stage with a more aggressive stance. The ripples of this war are still felt in US diplomacy today. And there you have it. The Spanish-American War, small conflict, big impact. Catch you next time for more bite-sized history.
Question number 12. World War I. Analyze the causes and effects of U.S. entry into World War I. How did the war change the domestic landscape?
I'm sure you've heard the news. World War I was a game changer, but how exactly did it reshape America? The US entered WWII for several reasons. Unrestricted German submarine warfare was sinking American ships. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, where Germany tried to ally with Mexico against the US, and let's not forget economic interests. America had lent billions to the Allies. Once in the war, the domestic scene changed dramatically. The federal government expanded, taking on new powers to manage the war effort. Factories ramped up production, giving birth to the military-industrial complex we know today. But it wasn't all positive. Dissent was harshly suppressed. The Espionage and Sedition Acts made it a crime to speak against the war. In just a few years, America went from isolation to a key player on the world stage. And on the home front, nothing was ever the same again. So next time you think about WWII, remember, it didn't just change the world, it changed America too.
Question number 13. The Roaring Twenties. Evaluate the social and cultural changes in the 1920s. How did the decade reflect tensions between tradition and modernity?
If you're a fan of jazz and wild parties, then the 1920s is your kind of decade. Let's explore this exciting era together. The 1920s was a decade of big changes and even bigger parties. Think jazz music, dazzling flappers, and the Harlem Renaissance, a cultural explosion that put African-American artists in the spotlight. But with all this new excitement came a clash of old and new. The Ku Klux Klan made a terrifying comeback, pushing back against the era's progress. And then there was the infamous Scopes trial, where teaching evolution in schools became a heated debate between science and religion. So, what does this all mean? The 1920s reflected a tug-of-war between modernity and tradition. with urbanization and new cultural movements on one side and conservative values on the other. In the end, the Roaring Twenties was a decade of contradictions, where the thrill of modernity danced hand in hand with the pull of tradition, and that's what made it unforgettable.
Question number 14. The Great Depression. Analyze the causes of the Great Depression and the effectiveness of the New Deal in addressing its challenges.
The Great Depression brought America to its knees, but the New Deal stood it back up. The Great Depression was a perfect storm of economic disasters. Stock market speculation led to the crash of 1929. Banks failed, wiping out savings. And agricultural overproduction sent prices plummeting, ruining farmers. Enter President Franklin D. Roosevelt with the New Deal. This series of programs and reforms aimed to revive the economy. Social Security provided a safety net for the elderly. Labor rights empowered workers to demand fair wages. Banking regulations restored trust in the financial system. Did it work? Well, it did alleviate some hardships and brought about significant changes, but full recovery didn't come until World War II ramped up industrial production. So, while the New Deal didn't completely fix the Great Depression, it laid the groundwork for a stronger economic future. And that's how history was made.
Question number 15. World War II. How did World War II affect U.S. society, including both the economy and social groups like women and minorities?
If you think World War II was just about battles overseas, think again. It transformed life back home too. World War II didn't just end the Great Depression, it sparked an economic boom. Factories were buzzing, creating millions of jobs in war industries. But it wasn't just men filling these roles. Women stepped up too, taking on jobs that had never been open to them before. Rosie the Riveter wasn't just a poster, she was a reality. Meanwhile, African Americans saw new opportunities as well. Many migrated to northern cities, escaping the oppressive South and finding work in burgeoning industrial sectors. This migration wasn't just about jobs, it laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement. So, next time you think about WWII, remember it wasn't just a global conflict, it was a catalyst for economic growth and social change right here in the US. From booming factories to a more diverse workforce, the ripple effects of the war shaped the nation we know today.
Question number 16. The Cold War. Discuss the origins of the Cold War and how it shaped U.S. foreign policy in the 20th century.
Imagine a chess game with nuclear stakes. That was the Cold War. The origins of the Cold War date back to the end of World War II, when the US and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers with clashing ideologies. The US championing democracy and capitalism, the Soviet Union pushing for communism. This ideological rift led to a tense, decades-long standoff. The US developed a strategy called containment to prevent the spread of communism worldwide. One key effort was the Marshall Plan, which pumped billions into rebuilding war-torn Europe, aiming to create strong democratic allies. But it didn't stop there. This strategy also meant military involvement. The US fought in Korea and Vietnam to curb communist expansion. These proxy wars were direct results of the Cold War's high-stakes chess game. By the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the Cold War had profoundly shaped US foreign policy, cementing America's role as a global leader and defender of democracy. And that's how a war without battles changed history.
Question number 17. Civil Rights Movement. Evaluate the impact of the Civil Rights Movement on U.S. society in the 1960s.
If your history books just gather dust, you're missing the real magic of the past. Let's explore the 1960s Civil Rights Movement. The 1960s Civil Rights Movement was a turning point in U.S. history. This powerful movement led to significant legal and social changes. Key legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were passed, ending segregation and ensuring voting rights for all citizens. But the impact didn't stop there. The Civil Rights Movement inspired other movements, including women's rights and LGBTQ+ rights, reshaped American identity, and laid the groundwork for a more inclusive society. So, next time you think about the 1960s, remember, it was a decade that transformed the nation, igniting a beacon of hope and equality for all. Stay curious and keep learning.
Question number 18. Vietnam War. Analyze the causes and consequences of U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. How did the war affect American society?
Why did millions of Americans protest a war thousands of miles away? The Vietnam War was a pivotal moment in the Cold War, with the US diving in to stop the spread of communism. It all ramped up with the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving the president power to send troops without a formal declaration of war. But the military intervention came with a high cost, both overseas and at home. As the war dragged on, it sparked massive protests, dividing the nation like never before. The images of conflict and the draft pulling young men into battle fueled a sense of distrust in the government. And in the end, despite the heavy sacrifice, America faced a harsh reality. Vietnam fell to communism, forever altering US foreign policy and leaving a lasting impact on American society. The Vietnam War didn't just change a country across the ocean, it reshaped America itself.
Question number 19. Watergate Scandal. Discuss the Watergate Scandal and its consequences for US politics.
I bet you didn't know that a simple break-in could topple a presidency. In 1972, 5 men broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. It seemed like a minor incident, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. As investigations unfolded, it was revealed that the break-in was part of a larger scheme by President Richard Nixon's administration to spy on political opponents. Nixon tried to cover it up, but a series of leaks exposed the truth. The scandal led to intense media scrutiny and congressional hearings, revealing abuses of power that shocked the nation. Facing certain impeachment, Nixon resigned in 1974, becoming the first US president to do so. Watergate had lasting effects on American politics. It fueled public distrust in government and led to significant reforms, including stricter campaign finance laws and limits on executive power. So the next time you hear the term Watergate, remember, it wasn't just a break-in, it was a turning point in US history.
Question number 20. The 9/11 attacks. Analyze the effects of the September 11, 2001 attacks on US foreign and domestic policy.
Stop everything! This is how 9/11s reshaped America as you know it. The September 11, 2001 attacks didn't just shock the world. They transformed US policy in huge ways. Internationally, the US launched the war on terror, leading to military actions in Afghanistan and Iraq. These interventions aimed to dismantle terrorist networks and bring stability, but they also sparked controversy and debate. On the home front, 9/11s led to sweeping changes in security. The Department of Homeland Security was created to coordinate national efforts against terrorism. Then came the Patriot Act, which increased surveillance but also stirred concerns about privacy and civil liberties. In short, 9/11s reshaped America's approach to both foreign and domestic policy, leaving lasting impacts we still see today. Stay tuned to learn more about how history continues to shape our present.